Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving into something absolutely foundational today. We're unpacking the definitive source material on a milestone that, frankly, fundamentally changes lives. How to build your first $100,000 completely from scratch. If you've ever felt like wealth building is this exclusive secret club and you just don't have the password, well, you're exactly in the right place. We're going to strip away all the noise, dive straight into the data, and look at the specific, actionable blueprint for generating six-figure wealth right from the ground up.
Zero. Just looking at that number can feel incredibly heavy, right? When you're standing at the bottom looking up at a massive financial mountain, zero is a place loaded with friction and anxiety. It's the starting line for so many of us, and honestly, it's the absolute hardest place to be because your own labor is literally the only tool you've got. It's where all the doubt lives. But, as our source material proves, it is also a totally blank canvas. It's the exact same baseline from which every single self-made wealthy person has had to start.
So here's the $100,000 question we're exploring today. How exactly do you bridge that massive gap from absolutely nothing to six figures? From the outside, it almost looks like magic, doesn't it? But it isn't magic, it's mechanics. It's a highly specific, reproducible process based on math, discipline, and time. How do we take that intimidating zero and stretch it, mold it, and build it into $100,000?
Well, here is your blueprint to six figures. We'll be looking at starting from absolute zero, the foundational blueprint, taking the first steps, accelerating your growth, and finally, the six-figure milestone. All right, let's jump right into part one, starting from absolute zero.
The truth is, most people get completely overwhelmed just thinking about that massive $100,000 goal. It makes sense, right? If you stare at the top of a mountain from the base, you're going to talk yourself out of the climb before you even tie your shoes. The shift you have to make is focusing purely on the step-by-step blueprint. You've got to stop staring at the summit and start looking at the map in your hands. You don't need to know how to make $100,000 right this second. You just need to know how to save your first $1,000. And then your next 1,000. It's entirely a game of immediate, microscopic focus.
Moving right along to section two, the foundational blueprints. Our source material is really explicit about this being a highly deliberate sequence. So what are these steps? Number one, starting from scratch. That means establishing a true baseline, like zeroing out any high-interest consumer debt, so you aren't constantly fighting a headwind. Number two, executing the step-by-step process. This means establishing a pretty brutal savings rate. We're talking about automating 20% of your income into broad market index funds before you even see your paycheck, while ruthlessly cutting your discretionary spending. And number three, attaining six-figure wealth. That is just the mathematical byproduct of repeating step two over and over. It totally demystifies wealth building, turning it from some lucky break into an executable algorithm.
But before we get into the heavy lifting, why is $100,000 the golden metric? Why this specific number? Well, historically speaking, hitting this six-figure mark is the hardest and most critical hurdle in personal finance. Legendary investors have pointed out for years that the first $100,000 is just a completely different beast than the milestones that come after it. It's your proof of concept. Once you hit it, compound interest finally becomes a tangible force. The math actually starts working for you instead of against you. Think about it. A 10% return on $1,000 is just $100, but a 10% return on $100,000, that's $10,000. That is a sum that can literally change the trajectory of your year.
Let's move into part three, taking the first steps. Building from scratch is a deliberate, step-by-step climb. It is definitely not a sudden leap. Early on, the grind feels incredibly slow, mostly because you're relying entirely on the shovel of your own active income. You're working side hustles, driving extra hours, canceling subscriptions, and putting in massive amounts of effort for what looks like really tiny returns. It's not a sudden leap, and honestly, expecting it to be is exactly why most people quit in year one or two. Your progression relies entirely on consistently taking those difficult, unglamorous first steps and hoarding cash to buy income-producing assets. When you look at this journey over time, there's a distinct gap between taking those first steps and reaching the phase of consistent building. This timeline really reinforces how trusting the step-by-step process naturally leads to wealth. But man, it requires patience. It's not about some overnight explosion. It's about staying on the timeline. There's a massive delay between the sweat you put in today and the compound interest you reap years down the road. But if you just stay on the timeline, you will reach point 4. It's a mathematical certainty of the blueprint. Now for the really fun part, section 4, accelerating your growth. Once that initial momentum is built, your growth accelerates drastically. You hit this amazing inflection point. You grind and grind from scratch, but suddenly, your previous investments start stacking on top of each other. The effort it takes to go from 0 to 50,000 takes years of manual saving. But going from 50,000 to 100,000, that happens significantly faster because your capital is finally working alongside your labor. Your money is out there making its own money. That momentum starts doing the heavy lifting for you, effectively acting like a second income stream that works 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So what are your marching orders? Here are the core actions that make up the mechanics. First, start from absolute scratch, no excuses. Second, trust the step-by-step map. Set up habit stocking, automate your finances so your money goes straight into investments before you even have a chance to spend it. Third, maintain consistent action, especially when it's boring. Maybe focus on increasing your earning power by negotiating a raise rather than just clipping coupons forever. And finally, watch the momentum build toward 100K. This shows exactly how those step-by-step actions start snowballing in your favor, as long as you refuse to stop executing the fundamentals.
And that brings us to our final section, the six-figure milestone.
The blueprint for six-figure wealth from zero. How to build $100,000 from scratch. Listen, this isn't just theoretical. The blueprint exists to prove that six-figure wealth is entirely achievable from absolutely nothing. You don't need a trust fund, you don't need a lottery ticket, or some crazy lucky break in the stock market. You just need the financial blueprint, the automated habits, and the unyielding tenacity to follow the timeline until the math takes over.
The true nature of this wealth journey is fundamentally uneven. That initial grind from zero, that represents the vast majority of your effort and your time. It takes the most energy, the most discipline, and it forms your critical foundation. But that accelerating momentum that carries you the rest of the way to 100 grand, that's the reward. Your relentless early grind literally earns you the momentum of compound growth. You simply cannot experience the acceleration without pushing through the friction of those early days. We've laid out the entire step-by-step map from zero to $100,000. We've dug into the psychology of starting at zero, the mechanics of automating your investments, and the sheer magic of that accelerating momentum once compound interest kicks in. The path is mathematically proven, and the source material shows us it can be done by anyone willing to actually do the work. So as we wrap up this explainer, the only question left for you is this. You've got the blueprint. When are you going to begin the climb? What is your very first step going to be today? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you on the next one.